Okay, so in today's video, let's talk about money goals, and specifically I want to talk about money goals you should be thinking about if you are in your 20s or your 30s. Now, the reason why I chose that age is because I am currently in my late 20s, so I feel like I have some experience when it comes to thinking about your finances in your 20s, but then also I tend to coach women who are in their 30s, and so I kind of know what they will also be thinking about when it comes to their own personal finance goals. Now, of course, you do not need to be in your 20s or 30s to watch this video, but what I want to do is just talk through some of the things you may want to think about when it comes to your finances, and they may not be very specific because everyone's personal circumstances are different, but I'm hoping that some of these things will encourage you to think about some of the goals that you may be working towards and also your financial future too. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so one of the money goals you may want to think about in your 20s and 30s is having a short-term savings plan. And what I mean by this is think about what you actually want to be saving for over the next couple of years. So let's say over the next 1 to 3 years, kind of finalize what your main priorities are going to be. So as an example, you might be thinking about buying a new car over the next couple of years and you would love to buy that in cash. So you'll probably be saving up for that. Or you might even be getting married, and so you'll want to be thinking about how much you're gonna save for your wedding. Or you might even be thinking about traveling over the next few months, and so you will want to figure out how much you need to save up for that holiday. I think having a goal of just finalizing your short-term savings plan can be really important, because when you now start to save money in general, you'll at least be working towards some of those priorities. Sometimes I think we don't realize that when we're trying to save money, it should be for a specific purpose. We should not be saving money just to save money. I mean, you can do that, but I honestly don't really see the point in doing that. And so when it comes to thinking about what you want in the short term, this will be really helpful, because then you'll at least know that each month you're working towards something. Now, of course, your short-term saving plan will probably change. For example, you may realize that you don't actually need to buy the car anymore, or maybe halfway through the year you decide that actually you would love to buy your first house, and so you want that to now also be a priority. No matter what it is, I still think at least starting to have a short-term saving plan will be important, because when you now start getting paid and you want to save money, you at least know that those savings are going towards something. And so even if it does change, all you need to do is adapt and then start saving for something else. And if you're liking this video so far, then feel free to give me a thumbs up, as it really does help to support the channel, plus it's free. Now, the second money goal I think you should be considering in your 20s and 30s is finalizing how much you want in your emergency fund and starting to save for it if you haven't already. Now, when it comes to emergency funds, essentially this is just a pot of money, so a pot of savings dedicated for emergency. So if something happens that is unexpected, you didn't realize it was going to happen, and you now have to fork out money for something, you should potentially have a pot of savings so that you can use the money without then having to go into debt, for example. And so you may have heard of Granny's rainy day fund, for example, and that's exactly what I mean. Now, the reason why I say it's important to finalize how much you want in your emergency fund is because it's going to be very different for everyone. So you may have heard experts saying that in terms of your emergency fund, you should have about 3 to 6 months of your expenses. So 3 to 6 months of your monthly expenses. But I will say that this is going to be different for everyone. So some people may be comfortable with a 3-month emergency fund, but some people may be comfortable with a 6-month emergency fund, or a 9-month, or even a year's worth of expenses. And so what you want to do is decide how much do you want in your emergency fund. Now, I do have a video that talks about emergency funds in much more detail, and I also talk through how to actually save up for your emergency fund. But essentially what I'm saying is decide how much you want in your emergency fund, and then if you haven't already, start saving for that too. Now, the next money goal you might want to think about when it comes to your 20s and 30s is to start thinking about your housing situation. So in this case, I would say you may want to start thinking about whether you may want to buy a house or if you may prefer renting. Now, there is always the argument of whether renting is throwing away money money or buying a house is much better because you get equity and all of that. I'm not going to go into that debate in this video, but the reason why I'm saying think about your housing is because even if you don't plan to buy anytime soon, but you know you want to buy a house in the future, that might be something you still want to start thinking about today. So for example, I had a client who is pretty much in her early 20s and she's not looking to buy her house until probably the next 7 or 8 years because she's currently living at home. But what she's done is she's starting to think about how much that house could potentially cost, especially because house prices may go up, and how much she may need to start saving from now in order for her to have a big enough deposit to then buy the house 8 years down the line. And so even if you're not planning to buy a house anytime soon, it is still something that you want to think about. And even for me, from my early 20s is when I started thinking about housing, specifically because at the time when I was in my early 20s, my mum really wanted to buy the house that we were living in, but it was much easier to do it with 2 incomes. And so I decided to buy that with her, knowing that I probably wouldn't be buying another house anyway until later on, probably in my late 20s. And so for me, from early on, I had been thinking about my housing situation, not only in the short term, but also in the long term as well. And so even if you are in your early 20s, for example, and let's say you've just finished uni and you've started working, even if you decide that you're maybe going to stay at home or rent for a few years, you want to start thinking about what you're going to be doing in the long term as well. Okay, so the next money goal you might want to think about when it comes to your 20s or 30s is building another stream of income. Now, even though I'm talking about creating a stream of income or even just making more money in general, I do want us to be careful, because what many of us tend to do is we'll try to be making up all this money without having actually learned how to manage that money in the first place. And so what ends up happening is if you have the side hustle or the second job coming in, you still don't know where your money is going, and then you end up still feeling broke every single time. And so when I'm talking about creating another stream of income, I'm coming from the place where you should already know how to manage your money so that when you now bring another stream of income, that can just elevate you even further. So once you've learned how to actually manage the money you have, I think creating another stream of income can be very, very powerful, not only because you will be able to have more money to save and invest for your financial future, but also if we go back to the pandemic, our jobs aren't guaranteed, okay? If we go back to 2020, because of all the uncertainty, so many employers were laying people off and people literally lost their jobs overnight. And many people would have been struggling financially if the government didn't come in. But who's to say that next time the government is going to come back and bail us all out? It may not happen. And so why creating another stream of income is going to be important is because if anything else happens to your job and your employer decides they may have to cut down your hours, for example, or they may have to lay you off entirely, if that happens, it would be good to at least have something else in the background so that you can at least pay for some expenses, and then you can use your emergency fund as a backup. Now, in terms of creating another stream of income, there's honestly so many things you can do. I'm pretty sure you've seen so many different YouTube videos and Instagram posts talking about making money. And so what I will say is definitely make sure you do your research. But I would also say that the reason why it's even more important to do this now is because when you are in your 20s and 30s, you can almost afford to take that risk. And so especially if you are of that age, this is probably the best time to start thinking about other things you can do outside your job. So I would definitely consider doing something if you haven't already. Now, the next money goal I think you should be considering in your 20s and 30s is to think about how much you're going to need in retirement. And I can already tell if you are in your 20s or 30s that you'll be thinking, oh gosh, Auntie V, I have so much time until retirement. I don't need to think about that now. Well, let me tell you, I have watched so many documentaries where people have not prepared for their retirement and they are in dire situations. And I do not want that to happen to you. And so if you plan on depending on the government to sort out your retirement, fair enough, don't listen to me. But if you have just a slight inkling that maybe you might need to sort out your retirement over the government doing it because we have no idea what they may be doing over the next 30 to 40 years, then I would be strongly thinking about your retirement and how much you will need. Now, in terms of how much you will need in retirement, you're probably going to be thinking about your expenses now, but you'll also be thinking about your expenses in the future. For example, you may not have a mortgage if you buy a house and pay off your mortgage. And so you just want to have a rough calculation in terms of how much you feel like you'll need in retirement. And again, again, I do have a video on retirement and financial independence in a bit more detail, so I'll make sure it's linked in the description below for you. But you want to start thinking about it, because the younger you are, the easier it is to start saving and investing for it. And so you may realize that you only need to be putting away a couple of £100 or dollars into your retirement accounts in order for you to have a solid retirement a few years later. And so I know that this is kind of like a boring topic and sometimes it can just feel a bit confusing, but I am begging you, please, please, please start thinking about your retirement if you haven't already, because honestly, your future self is going to be so thankful that you at least decided to take the plunge and start saving and investing for it. Now, if you're someone who's decided, actually, I do really want a solid retirement, and maybe I even want to retire early and become financially independent so that I don't have to work at my job for the next 40 or 50 years, or maybe you just really want to be able to save more money so that you can hit some of these other financial goals, then make sure you do check out my one-on-one coaching, because what I can essentially do is help you create a plan for not only becoming financially independent and thinking about your retirement, but also I can help you save more money easily so that you can start working towards things like having an emergency fund or even just saving up for your first house. So make sure you do check that out if you haven't already. You can book a free sales call just to find out more about working with me. So I'll link more information up here for you and in the description below. But what you may have realized is that although these goals aren't completely specific in terms of how much you should actually be saving, for example, or how much you should have by the time you turn 30, what I really wanted to do in this video is get you to start thinking about the areas of your personal finances that you may not have typically thought about, or that you may have just kind of glossed over, that might actually be really important to you. But remember that it is never too late to start focusing on your finances anyway, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s or beyond. Just taking the next step to actually start focusing on your finances is going to be so helpful for your future self. So if you did like this video, then please do give me a thumbs up if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments, what other money goals are you striving for in your 20s or 30s? I do post every Tuesday, so if you would like to know more, then of course you can subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys next week.